Watukufu waangalizi wa mbali na mbali, wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Leo rijiviwa rangia vani nieleze mahadisi ya Komori hatu. Wami Michaeli wami mwana mweu wa Komori. Natovenza wa stamili wazade wangu wa shifwani. Excuse me. Washivwani na sangani kwezi watukufu wazade wangu. So just a little background on myself, as Claudia said. My name is Mike Sanders. I'm a first-year student here at SIA. The last 5 years, I lived in a place called Comoros, which is, we'll get into where it is. It's a small archipelago off the east coast of Africa. My first 2 years there were spent with the Peace Corps. Then the next 2 were spent with the University of Comoros, where I taught English and linguistics, among other things. And finally, I ended my time there with the United Nations Development Project, working on COVID response. So with that, I'm very excited about our talk today. So let's get into it. First, I'm going to focus our attention on where we're at here. I want to focus our attention on the Western Indian Ocean. This will be the basis for what becomes modern Comoros, linguistically, economically, and culturally. So I'm just going to draw our attention there. And then furthermore, zooming in a little more, as you see here in the map up top, we have the northern end of Mozambique Channel. So we're between Madagascar and Mozambique and Tanzania here. And then below we have the four islands of the archipelago. Starting in the top, we have Grand Comore, which is called Ngazija. For the purposes of this presentation, I will be calling them the Comorian names. So we have Ngazija at the top, the smallest island, Moheli or Mwali. Then we have Anjouan or Nzwani. And finally, in the south, Mayotte or Maore. Continuing, just to give an idea of what we're going to speak on here, because Comoros is not a very well-known place, it's really going to be a general talk about the influences that create a unique place and a unique setting in the world. So we're going to look at cultural influences, the history of settlement and colonialization, and the independence movement, and then working towards modern day Comoros to where we're at now. But first, a little fun. So there are some legends about the islands beginning in the 10th century BC, where we have royalty, the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, the ever famous couple. It is said that as the legend goes, King Solomon commissions a ring for his bride, the Queen of Sheba. The ring is lost at sea, but the ring is imbued with such power that from where the ring falls overboard, a volcano springs, and from which the Comorian archipelago is born. Later, they have a son named Menelik I. And in some classic family feud style, it is said that he steals his father's throne. He steals King Solomon's throne and hides it in the Comorian Islands. This is the context for which it is said that King Solomon visits the Comorian archipelago. He does end up retrieving the throne, or so the legend says. And then finally, and maybe most fun, the ring that ends up being the wedding ring of King Solomon and Queen of Sheba is said to have been embroidered with the Lion of Judah to represent the King of Israel. The last descendant of this couple is said to have been Haile Selassie, the last emperor of Ethiopia, who also started the well-known religion of Rastafari. Bob Marley was a very famous Rastafari as well, and it is said that when he dies, when he dies, the ring is given to him and is buried with Bob Marley, the ring of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. So next, just to give us an idea of the difference in the four islands, because they are very different in age and how that affects their physical appearance today. In the top left, we have Ngazija, which is, as you can see, the volcano that sprung from the ring, is called Mount Kartala. It's really inescapable on that island. It really is prominent no matter where you are, even towards the northern end of the island where you're furthest away from it. Moving right over to Maole, it is the smallest and least developed of the islands. It is well known for its coastal regions and its islets. It's also very fertile, one of the most fertile hatching grounds for turtles in the world. And moving down to the bottom left, we have Nzwani, which is the third oldest island, and because of its age, it has a very Jurassic feel. That's one of the first opinions that people have when you fly into the island, is it has that very much like, it looks like the island that they could have filmed Jurassic Park on. It's very mountainous, misty hills kind of, and this plays a role throughout its history as different cultures develop, different cultures, subcultures, however you want to call it, develop between coastal populations and mountain populations. And last, we have Maore, the oldest of the islands in the very south. It has a fully formed reef and has one of the the reef forms one of the largest enclosed lagoons in the world. This plays a role in as well, because the reef protects the island from basically safe harboring. So it becomes a pirate safe harbor, if you will. Here's a picture of the reef. I would like to note for future, we're going to come back to this because this, like I said, this plays a role throughout. While the Comorian name for the island is Maore, the colonial name for it is called Mayotte, and there is some thought that this name comes from the Comorian word Mauti, which means death, and this is thought to have come from the difficulty with navigating the waters. And like I said, that will play a role throughout. So moving on into history, the first settlers arrived from Oman in 536. They named the islands Juzur al-Qamar, which is the name of our presentation today, the Islands of the Moon in Arabic. The Bantu people come in the following centuries over the next 1,000 years in different waves. We have waves from the Kenya Mombasa area, as well as further south from Mombasa, moved to the islands. They end up being the target of slave trade. That is the main economic motor of the islands throughout this period of time. Waves of Sunni Muslims arrive throughout. There's a lot of contention to this, but it is said there's at least 2 waves of Iranian Sunni Muslims that arrived, the latest being in the 14th century. And continuing, that they play a role, especially on the island of Anjouan, they play a large role in the development of the culture. And sprinkled in throughout, there are smaller waves, less impactful waves of settlers from India and Southeast Asia. Moving on into colonial history, the Portuguese arrive in 1505. A Portuguese merchant named Dom João de Castro lands in Anjouan, and he notes, he has a couple interesting notes in his journal. He notes that he notes the dichotomy of where people live. He says he writes that people racialized as Black live in the interior and in the hills, while people he calls Moors live in the coastal region. This ends up having an effect even till today. There is some contention that Comorians are Moorish. This is disproven later on, but this was a widely held belief based on this journal entry, which it makes sense. He is Portuguese. It would make sense why he sees a phenotype similar to Moorish and calls it and notes it as such. The British and French arrive in the following centuries to different effects. We see Britain more or less they take a standoffish role. They have influencers on the islands close to the rulers, but have no real official capacity. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 plays a huge role in the dynamic of the region. Some colonial powers step back from the region. France, meanwhile, sees this as an opportunity to ensure its hold in the Western Indian Ocean. As we see here, the first island to come under French rule happens in 1841. This is because the island is constantly under threat from Malagasy pirates trying to retake their former stronghold. So they reach out to France for protection. The rest eventually follow in 1886. Moving into modern day Comoros and the independence movement, the fears began in 1963 when the capitals moved from Dzaoudze, Maore, to Moroni, the current day capital, in Gazija, the most populous island. So the first referendum happens in 1974 at the behest of Ahmed Abdullah, who would be the former president at this time. He is a parliamentarian in France. It passes overwhelmingly. After in 1975, he declares independence outright after France stalls on giving them independence, and this is coming at the foot of the wider independence movement for the continent as well. Specifically, we see Tanzania next door, which there is a very close cultural link between Tanzania, specifically Dar es Salaam, and Comoros. So this is just on the heels of those movements as well. France, after stalling its feet, plays to the fears of the Maore population and holds a second referendum, under which they're highly questionable. It was a very highly questioned referendum. There were the French deployed army personnel and soldiers to voting stations, and so it is speculated about how accurate the numbers are. But the referendum passes. The referendum to stay passes overwhelmingly. So now we have 3 islands enter the Union of Comoros today, and 1 by mail. Now we have to get into between 1977 and 2001. 2001, we entered into the current constitution. But in these 35 years, there is a lot that happens. Comoros undergoes about 20 coups, 9 of which are said to have been bloody, most of which involve a man named Bob Denard. Bob Denard was a product of French intelligence unleashed on East Africa, multiple East African countries. After his first coup in 1977, he becomes basically the head of the Comorian Secret Service, from which he is a de facto leader throughout his time there. He takes breaks throughout to do his favorite pastime of cooing in other countries, but always winds up back in Comoros. His last coup is in 1995, and this comes at the heels of Jacques Chirac, President Jacques Chirac of France, disowning him and cutting his ties to French intelligence after Jacques Chirac was very critical of him in his role as a prime minister in France prior in the late 80s. Bob Denard is also aligned with apartheid South Africa, good friends to have if you're going to be doing coups in Africa. And he ends up, apartheid South Africa falls in 1992, so he loses both his pillars of support. At that point in 1995, he runs his last coup on a president named Mohamed Johar, who was very well liked. Some people will tell you he was the last president to be liked by everyone on every island. At this point, France sends military to come get their stray dog, and he is tried and convicted in 2001. He's sentenced in 2006. He maintains his innocence throughout, asserting that he was acting under direct orders of French intelligence for the entirety of his time in Comoros. He ends up dying unnoteworthily in 2007. To this point, there are multiple unbinding UN resolutions, non-binding UN resolutions against France, telling them to leave and that they are illegally administrating the French island. This is the stance of the current Comorian constitution. So here, and we can see just from a simple Google Maps, we can see the difference in the level of development here. You can see Maore down to the bottom here with its well-defined highways and its provincial borders all cut up, whereas Comoros, the upper three islands, you see just the main island has a nice defined road. Nzwani in the middle here with its one not classified as a highway, but it's one road, and then from this view, Moali lagging behind, as it may be. Moving into culture, we have a few things that make up the pillars of Comorian culture. First and foremost is the religion of Islam. We'll get into that and Comorians' view of Islam and a larger regional view of Islam. Over here to the right, I have some traditional boats called ngawas that used to be the main mode of travel, believe it or not, between the continent and the islands. Now today they are used by reef fishermen mostly. But those are a symbol of the Bantu people who also play a role. Bantu culture, obviously ever present in the Comoros, brought there by the people. And then in the bottom left here, we have pictures of lang-lang flowers, symbolizing the agriculture that takes place on the island. And then in the bottom right, the weddings of the island. The weddings are the center of social life on the islands and play a major role in the formulation of modern day Comoros. But first, let's move back to the Bantu. Recently, there was research by the Human Genome Project, and their specific goal was to look for the introduction of Southeast Asian presence into the local genomes. They focused on the Swahili coast, which is our coast that we saw in the beginning from northern Mozambique up to southern Somalia. They were looking at the introduction of Southeast Asian populations into local populations in Madagascar, Comoros, and the Swahili coast. Isolating for this, they took out any Malagasy influence, hoping to find this, and they found something very interesting. They found that, as you see here by our dates, YBP stands for years before present. And as you see, it's noted that the Southeast Asian presence in the Comorian genome is present much longer than much before the Madagascar sample. This is kind of surprising because of anyone who knows Madagascar. Eastern Madagascar is you'll find a phenotype that is very much would not be out of place in Southeast Asia. Obviously very, very mixed with Bantu people coming from the continent. And then as you move further east, this tends to be a more mixed phenotype. They do note imbalance in gender for Comoros, where men trended to be a higher percentage of Middle Eastern, where women tended to be a higher percentage of Swahili, the Swahili genome. Now I'd like to move on to the continent, because the continent does obviously play a role in the development of all aspects of Comorian life. So first, the Bantu people are originally an ethnic group from West Africa. They are thought to have been forced migrations along the way, beginning in the 1st century AD. There are two main waves. The first moves across the Congo River. There was some hope to be able to settle in the jungles, but the jungles proved too much. And so they move into the Great Rift area or the Great Lakes region. Along with these two strands, the second strand comes down along the coast through Angola and Namibia, as you see there on the map. This tracks with the linguistic development that we're going to take a look at in a second that ends up coming to the Comorian Islands. The Swahili that we know today develops out of as a trader's language, as a seafarer's language. So it has much more input from the other cultures than, say, some other languages that don't have that contact. Comoros, Comorian ends up being very much the same way. So here we have the same map, and we're going to take a look at the linguistic development of the Bantu family tree, one of the most popular language trees in Africa. So here we have in the Bantu languages, there is a prefix that is affixed to words at the beginning to denote origin or type. In English, we do this kind of, this would be, in the English equivalent, it would kind of be like from. So I would say, I am from a place. In Swahili, this becomes ki Swahili. So Swahili, when you say Swahili in Swahili, it becomes ki Swahili. This is very, very common in ki Rwanda and Rwanda, as well as some other Bantu languages there. Moving down the coast, as the people did, the language becomes, this prefix becomes she. So Comorian, in Comoros, we say she Comori. Moving along, Mozambique, Shona, they do this with chi. Further down in Mozambique, this is where we start to see the famous clicks that happen in languages, so people. So the Tsonga language, it becomes Tsonga. Moving along into South Africa, the most popular, some of the most popular languages in South Africa, they accomplish this with Isi, and Lesotho is Se. This brings us to the legend of Romani. Romani is said to be a princess, the daughter of the Sultan of Damoni on the island of Anjouan. She is said to have had such beauty that her father feared letting her out of the house. So in order to let her out of the house, he decides to cover her up. He imports this cloth, which is originally from the Mozambique area, and covers her to the point where it's just her eyes. And this becomes a very famous, typical Comorian pose with just the eyes showing. So Romani, at the time, she is known by this cloth. And after she is married, she is able to come out of the cloth, her beauty is confirmed, and they live happily ever after. But this cloth, the story of this cloth, as we see it's worn in modernity below here in the bottom left, this cloth becomes known as Shi Romani, or the cloth of Romani. Next, moving on to Islam. Islam is ever present in Comorian culture. The culture is based around it because it has been there from the beginning. When people in East Africa assert that Islam is an African religion, it's because they have played a role in it from the beginning, and it has been there from the beginning of these societies. So Islam is actually not brought to Comoros by Arabs or any outside groups. Two scholars, shortly around the time of the Prophet's death, two scholars named Nsamwinza and Febeja Mambwe travel to Mecca when they hear of the advent of Islam to learn from the Prophet. By the time they arrive, he is dead, but they are undeterred and come back to Comoros, vowing to spread Islam in the archipelago. Many Comorians will tell you it's the most Muslim country in the world, as it is 98% practicing. Most of the 2% non-practicing are expats, whether they be French, Americans, or whoever else that may be on the island. Children start very early learning to read and write Arabic for the purposes of studying the Quran, and this is basically makes up the preschool system. As in Comoros, there is a side government for one that mirrors the government at all levels, mainly for the purposes, solely for the purposes of Islam. It is led by a mufti, who you can think of as the president of Islam in Comoros. This is a lifetime appointment chosen by the president for the purposes of guiding Islam in Comoros. And then throughout, there are what you would call governor level people in the system, and then getting down to the teachers. You see this teacher in the bottom left corner here. He would be called the ulema. So these are teachers of Islam, and the system, the second governmental system specific to Islam in the country. Now on to weddings. This is going to be very brief, because weddings are anything but brief in Comoros. They last anywhere from, they can be a single ceremony to 7 days. There are two types of weddings. There is a wedding for the purposes of getting married, so that people become legally engaged. And then there is what is called a grand mariage, or a big wedding. And this serves a couple of purposes, mainly societal. You cannot, to gain the highest level of societal respect in Comorian society, you must have done a grand mariage. And part of the reason for that is, part of the grand mariage is, weddings are seen as a gift to communities. So as part of your wedding, depending on the island, the traditions are different. On the biggest island in Gazija, it is very common to build what are called shilindo, which is a waiting place for people to sit and gather and be together. On the other islands, it may be something as simple as feeding the community for a day. And so other people don't have to worry about food for that day. And so these are seen as gifts to the communities. And these are defining moments for the families. They set families up societally in this way. There are exorbitant amounts spent on these weddings. Some islands in Gazija spend upwards of 75,000 euros on a single wedding. You can see how that is problematic, considering the average annual income in Comoros is something over $2,000 or 2,000 euros. So they spend a lifetime of money on these weddings, so much so that the government has tried to crack down on the spending to no avail. Moving on, we're going to move into economy a bit, because these last two sections of culture are very much tied into the economy. It is an agrarian, it is a fishery economy, and so you will see these two blended into the same topic. The perfume isles is another nickname for the islands because of the flowers, the natural flowers that grow on the island. Pictured here, you see jasmine, which is of importance. This is given to welcome people either to a family or to the island, whether they be traveling from afar or what have you. It is a welcome symbol. Here's a view of 2019 exports from Comoros. You see the majority of this is made up of spices. Mainly, the two main ones are going to be vanilla, and the biggest one is cloves. We're going to talk about those in a second. And then second, our namesake, the essential oils, basically lang lang oil, which is very common in some in many Western perfumes. Moving on, there are two types of agriculture that happen. There are the cash crops, like I just mentioned. On the far left here, we have cloves that are unpicked. They are typically picked from here by people that climb trees, and then they bring them down and dry them in the sun. A kilo of cloves, or say 2.2 pounds of cloves, can sell for about 5 euros. They will be bought for 5 euros, and then 2.2 pounds of cloves of dried cloves like this can be bought in America for around $115. So I'll let you do the math on that. Lang Lang oil is no different. We see a Lang Lang oil, we see a Lang Lang flower here in the center of our screen, and then it is cooked in oil. It is cooked in a vat, and we can see the lid here. This vat resembles something like we in America would recognize as a whiskey still. And then that oil is sold by weight as well, because the denser the oil, the more fragrant it is and the more valuable it is. Moving locally, there is agriculture for local use. Here we have three staples of the Comorian diet. In the middle here, we have what is cassava root, or some people know as juca. And then moving down here, we have taro root. And then my personal favorite and a tasty breakfast is breadfruit, known locally as friapa. And then down here is cassava leaves. The quintessential Comorian dish is called mataba, and it is made with these leaves being ground up with garlic and salt and peppers, local peppers, and then cooked in coconut milk for upwards of 3 hours. And it is delightful, to say the least. Moving on to fisheries here, I'd like to point us to the picture on the left, where we can draw some information about the everyday fishing activities. So these boats you see in the background here are the typical boats that most of the fishing will be done. Most of the off-continental fishing will be done. They will have boat motors put on these boats, and typically fishermen go out twice a day, once in the morning for the lunch run, and then once in the afternoon for the dinner run. The fish you see the woman carrying on her head here are a yellowfin tuna. They are symbolized by, we have intake records here from almost 10 years ago. They are symbolized by the light blue fish, or the light blue color here. These fish locally are known as puere. The other type of fish that is very common here is a bluefin tuna, which is much larger. They can grow very large, actually, but the common size brought ashore is somewhere around 40 to 50 kilos, and that is signified by the blue, the dark blue intake numbers up at the top. The yellows at the bottom you see of all these are reef fish found throughout the archipelago. Comoros is a land of legends reborn. So here pictured, we have a fish thought to have gone extinct 65 million years ago. When in actuality, it was so extinct that Comorians have a name for it. In Comorian, they're called gombesa. In English and French, we say coelacanth. So these are a prehistoric fish, unchanged for millions and millions and millions of years. For scale, you can see the picture on the left. This is one caught off the coast of Mlindi in Kenya, being examined by Kenyan scientists. This is kind of like the Comorian fisherman's lotto, because they know if they can get this on ice quick enough, foreign scientists will come and pay them thousands of dollars for a specimen. So this is, if a Comorian fisherman brings home one of these, it's a very good day. Moving on to probably the most serious topic today in Comoros is the silent migratory crisis between the islands of Anjouan and Mayotte. 70 nautical kilometers separate Nzwani and Maore. It's about a 4.5 hour boat ride, as stories go. As we talked about earlier, Mayotte comes as a derivation of the Comorian word Mayuti, which means death. And that is because throughout the years, it is notoriously difficult to navigate, as you see by the barrier reef. A rogue wave, a low tide, any number of scenarios can throw your boat onto the reef and cause you to go overboard. And then from there, anything is on. It is a constant debate about how many people actually have died in this 70-kilometer stretch of ocean since 1995. France has an interest in it being very low, hence their their estimate at 10,000. If I was guessing, I would say Comoros has a better idea of how many people are missing from its shores. And Comoros says it's almost certainly around 50,000. Just to put that in perspective, the current total population of Comoros is 850,000 people. In 2000, it was 710,000. So that's not a small portion of your population that is lost to a migratory crisis in the ocean. And yet, another motivation for France to lowball an estimate on this is it's very common for them to for the Maore, the government, the French government of Mayo, to pick up boats. They'll pick up stray boats that they find in the water, and then do no searches for anyone or where that boat come. They just confiscate the boat, and that's it. So this is sadly the is Mayo living up to its name. And finally, we have some here in the graphic to the left, we have some statistics from the World Bank as of almost 10 years ago, and the updates to those statistics on the right. And with that, I need to give a special thank you. I want to give a special verbal thank you to Comorian historians who reached out to me when I said I was doing this. Al Komori, Sheikh Halawi, and Makua BH on Twitter. Go follow them. I'm sure they'll get a kick out of that. And with that, thank you very much. In Comoros, we say marahaba. And with that, I will take any questions that you may have.
Feel free to unmute yourself or type the question in the chat if you'd like.
Hello. Just to address current events, I wanted to ask, do you have any idea about how the coronavirus has affected Comoros and what its response is?
Yes, thank you, Cam. Right now, Comoros was relatively untouched the first wave. There was cases, but there was something about the first wave, much like much of sub-Saharan Africa. Comoros was not as hard hit as other places. This really lulled Comorians into a false sense of security. So when the South African variant spread to the smallest island of Moheli in January, it quickly engulfed the country, bringing it right back into the crisis. It was to a point early on where a soccer coach who was visiting a player in South Africa had brought it back to his rural village in Moheli, to the point where in the span of a week, this small village lost 30 people. I think they found 50 cases, and they were so unprepared that 30 of those 50 people died over that week. Numbers quickly inflated towards the end of January, and then coming into February, they are starting to recede on the two smaller islands of Nzwani and Mwali, while Gazija still, all the international traffic comes through Gazija, so they face some different scenarios that the other two islands do not. And so Gazija is still very much in the thick of things with regards to coronavirus. Any other questions? If not,
this is Marsa.
oh yes, doctor.
So I was just wondering, what is the role of France now in Comoros since since Bob Denard is out of the picture? How has the relation been between the two nations, and especially in light of the migration in between Anjouan and Mayotte?
Mm-hmm. Good question. As of with the election of French President Emmanuel Macron, there is a two-sided nature to this relationship. There is an adversarial side with respect to the Mayotte, but there is also there is also this tension as Comoros looks to distance itself from France politically. So this winds up with Comoros strengthening relations with China through several aid projects that have taken place in the last decade, whether it be Olympic stadiums, highways, or hospitals. Comoros, for the record, Comoros is not a part of the Belt and Road Initiative yet. There is some mystery as to why that is, because there is a very close relationship between the two countries. As recently as 2018, President Azali Assoumani was in a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and both were very complimentary of the Belt and Road Initiative and its effect in Africa. But yet Comoros is one of 7 African countries that is not signed to it. They also push closer to their Arab League comrades. Comoros being a part of the Arab League, they tend to be very close with Saudi Arabia and Dubai. There are very close cultural connections with Dubai. So there is an amicable relationship on its face between the Comorian state and France, but the contentiousness comes from the French treatment of Comorian citizens in Mayo, because the Comorian government does have an interest in making sure that their citizens are okay in Mayo, and they are constantly subject to, for lack of a better word, racist rhetoric that comes from Maoris politicians about, there is this sentiment in Mayo of that when you boil it down, boils down very much to anti-Africanism, which is ironic because, as we saw from the genome type, they are a majority. They are not different in any significant way from Comorians of the Northern Three Isles, and African or anti-poor people sentiment with their treatment with regards to Comorian citizens. So on one hand, we have an amenable relationship with regards to direct relations between the Comorian state and the French state. And on the other hand, we have a contentious relationship with regards to the treatment of Comorian citizens in French territory.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mike? All right, well, I want to thank you again, Mike, for such a comprehensive presentation. I'm so impressed with your wealth of knowledge. And we will, because we did record this, we will be posting this on the SIA YouTube channel. So that will be available for future viewing if you'd like. But thank you again, Mike, and we look forward to having you all join us for a future Around the World Series presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.